Chapter 2. Listening. Momo was comfortably off from now on, at least in her own estimation. She always had something to eat, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on circumstances and on what people could spare. She had a roof over her head, she had a bed to sleep in, and she could make herself a fire when it was cold. Most important of all, she had acquired a host of good friends. You may think that Momo had simply been fortunate to come across such friendly people. This was precisely what Momo herself thought. But it soon dawned on the neighbors that they had been no less fortunate. She became so important to them that they wondered how they had ever managed without her in the past. And the longer she stayed with them, the more indispensable she became. So indispensable, in fact, that their one fear was that she might someday move on. The result was that Momo received a stream of visitors. She was almost always to be seen with someone sitting beside her, talking earnestly, and those who needed her but couldn't come themselves would send for her instead. As for those who needed her but hadn't yet realized it, the others used to tell them, "Why not go and see Momo?" In time, these words became a stock phrase with the local inhabitants, just as they say all the best or so long or heaven only knows. So they took to saying on all sorts of occasions, "Why not go and see Momo?" Was Momo so incredibly bright that she always gave good advice or found the right words to console people in need of consolation or delivered fair and far-sighted opinions on their problems? No, she was no more capable of that than anyone else of her age. So, could she do things that put people in a good mood? Could she sing like a bird or play an instrument, given that she lived in a kind of circus? Could she dance or do acrobatics? Nope, it wasn't any of those either. Was she a witch then? Did she know some magic spell that would drive away troubles and cares? Could she read a person's palm or foretell the future in some other ways? Nope. What Momo was better at than anyone else was listening. Anyone can listen, you may say. What's so special about that? But you'd be wrong. Very few people know how to listen properly. And Momo's way of listening was quite unique. She listened in a way that made slow-witted people have flashes of inspiration. It wasn't that she actually said anything or asked questions that put such idea into their heads. She simply sat there and listened with the utmost attention and sympathy, fixing them with her big dark eyes, and they suddenly became aware of ideas whose existence they had never suspected. Momo could listen in such a way that worried and indecisive people knew their own minds from one moment to the next, or shy people felt suddenly confident and at ease, or downhearted people felt happy and hopeful. And if someone felt that life had been an utter failure and that he himself was only one among millions of wholly unimportant people who could be replaced as easily as broken window panes, he would go and pour out his heart to Momo. And even as he spoke, he would come to realize by some mysterious means that he was absolutely wrong, that there was only one person like himself in the whole world, and that consequently he mattered to the world in his own particular way. Such was Momo's talent for listening. One day, Momo received a visit from two close neighbors who had quarreled violently and weren't on speaking terms. Their friends had urged them to go and see Momo because it didn't do for neighbors to live at daggers drawn. After objecting at first, the two men had reluctantly agreed. One of them was the bricklayer, who had built Momo's stove and painted the pretty flowered picture on her wall. Salvatore by name. He was a strapping fellow with a black mustache that curled up on the ends. The other, Nino, was skinny and always looked tired. Nino ran a small inn on the outskirts of town, largely patronized by a handful of old men who spent the entire evening reminiscing over one glass of wine. Nino and his plump wife, Liliana, were also friends of Momo's and had often brought her good things to eat. So there the two men so there the two men sat, one on the side of the stone arena, silently scowling at nothing in particular. When Momo saw how angry with each other they were, she couldn't decide which one of them to approach first. Rather than offend either one of them, she sat down midway between them, on the edge of the arena, and looked at each of them in turn, waiting to see what would happen. Lots of things take time, and time was Momo's only form of wealth. After the two of them had sat there in silence for minutes on end, Salvatore abruptly stood up. I'm off, he announced. I've shown my goodwill by coming here. But the man's as stubborn as a mule, Momo. You can see that for yourself. And he turned on his heel. Goodbye and good riddance, Nino called after him. You needn't have bothered to come in the first place. I wouldn't make it up with a vicious brute like you. Salvatore swung around, puce with rage. Who's a vicious brute? He demanded menacingly, retracing his steps. Say that again if you dare. As often as you like, yelled Nino. I suppose you think that you're big and tough for anyone to speak the truth to your face. Well, I will, to you or anyone else that cares to listen. That's right. Come here and murder me. That way you tried. That's right. Come here and murder me the way you tried to the other day. I wish I had, roared Salvador, clenching his fists. There you are, Momo. You see the dirty lies he tells. All I did was take him by the scruff of the neck and dump him in the pool of slops behind that lousy inn of his. You couldn't even drown a rat in that. Readdressing himself to Nino, he shouted, Yes, you're still alive and kicking. Worse luck. Insults flew thick and fast after that, and for a while Momo was at a loss to know what it was all about, and why the pair of them was so furious with each other. It transpired by degrees that Salvador's only reason for assaulting Nino was that Nino had slapped his face in the presence of some customers, though Nino counterclaimed that Salvador had previously tried to smash all of his crockery. That's another dirty lie, Salvador said angrily. I only threw a jug at the wall that was cracked already. Maybe, Nino retorted, but it was my jug. You had no right to do such a thing. Salvatore protested that he had every right, seeing that Nino had cast aspersions on him on his professional skill. He turned to Momo. Know what he said about me? He said I couldn't build a wall straight because I was drunk 24 hours a day. My great grandfather was the same, he said, and he'd helped to build the Leaning Tower of Pisa. But Salvador, said Nino, I was only joking. Some joke, growled Salvador. Very funny, I don't think. It then emerged that Nino had only been had only been paying Salvador back for another joke. He'd woken up one morning to find some words daubed onto the tavern door in bright red paint. They read, This inn is out. Nino had found that just as unamusing. The two of them spent some time wrangling over whose had been the better joke. Then, after working themselves up into a lather again, they broke off. Momo was staring at them wide eyed, but neither man quite knew how to interpret the scare. Was she secretly laughing at them, or was she sad? Although her expression gave no clue, they suddenly seemed to see themselves mirrored in her eyes and began to feel sheepish. Okay, said Salvador. Maybe I shouldn't have painted those words on your door, Nino. But I would have done it if you hadn't refused to serve me much as a single glass of wine. That was against the law, as you know full and well. I've always paid up, and you'd no call to treat me that way." "Oh, hadn't I just?" Nino retorted. "What about the St. Anthony's business?" "Ah, that floored you, hasn't it? You cheated me right, left, and center. I wasn't going to take it lying down." "I cheated you?" Salvatore protested, smiting his brow. "You've got it the wrong way around. It was that you tried to cheat me, but you didn't succeed." The fact was, Nino had hung the picture of St. Anthony's on the wall in the barroom, a clipping from an illustrated magazine, which he'd cut out and framed. Salvatore offered to buy the picture one day, ostensibly because he found it so beautiful. By dint of skillful haggling, Nino then had persuaded Salvatore to part with the radio in exchange, laughing up his sleeve to think that Salvatore was getting the worst of the bargain. After the deal had been struck, it turned out that nesting between the picture and the cardboard backing was a banknote of which Nino had known nothing. Discovering that he had been outwitted, Nino angrily demanded the money back because it hadn't been included in the bargain. Salvatore refused to hand it over, whereupon Nino refused to serve him any more. And that's how it all had begun. Once they had traced the vendetta back to the original cause, the men fell silent for a while. Then Mino said, "Be honest, Salvatore. Did you or did you not know about the money before we made the deal?" "Of course I knew. I wouldn't have gone through with it." "In other words, you diddled me?" "What? You mean you really didn't know about the money?" "No, I swear I didn't." "There you are then. If you, it was you that tried to diddle me, or you wouldn't have taken my radio in exchange for a worthless scrap of newsprint." "Well, how did you know about the money?" "I saw another customer tuck it in the back as a thank you to St. Anthony a couple of nights before." Nino chewed his lip. "Was it a lot of money?" "Only what the radio was worth," said Salvador. "I see," Nino said thoughtfully. "So that's what all this was about? A clipping from a magazine?" Salvador scratched his head. "I guess so," he growled. "You're welcome to have it back, Nino." "Certainly not," Nino replied with dignity. "A deal's a deal. We shook hands on it after all." Quite suddenly, they burst out laughing. Clambering down the stone steps, they met in the middle of the grassy arena, exchanged bear hugs, and slapped each other on the back. Then they hugged Momo and thanked her profusely. When they left a few minutes later, Momo stood waving till they were out of sight. She was glad her two friends had made up. Another time, a little boy brought her his canary because it wouldn't sing. Momo found that a far harder proposition. She had to she had to sit and listen to the bird for a whole week before it started to trill and warble again. Momo listened to everyone and everything, to dogs and cats, crickets and tortoises, even to the rain, to the winds, and to the pine tree. And all of them spoke to her after their own fashion. Many were the even Many were the evenings when, after her friends had gone, she would sit by herself in the middle of the old stone amphitheater, with the sky starry vault overhead, and simply listen to the great silence around her. When she did this, she felt she was sitting at the center of a giant ear, listening to world and of the stars, and she seemed to hear soft but majestic music that touched her heart in the strangest way. On nights like these, she always had the most beautiful dreams. Those who still think that listening isn't an art should see if they can do it half as well.